Welcome to the International Trade and Port Security panel. I'm Sada Fuentes, Vice President for Government Affairs at Transportation Institute, and we're very glad to have you here. We have an excellent panel with us today, and I'm grateful for all of your attendance, and I also want to thank the Navy League for putting on this show and its staff for all the hard work they do behind the scenes to make this all possible. So thank you. America is a maritime nation. This means that our ports are critical gateways for our national security and economic prosperity. America's 300 maritime ports support 31 million jobs and generate $5.4 trillion in economic activity, nearly 26% of America's GDP. About 90% of trade by volume moves by the sea, making ports a critical driver of our economic engine. The importance of our ports can often go unnoticed by the general public, but after the ship backlog on the West Coast, the toilet paper shortage, and ships stuck in various canals and ports, the public is now paying attention to global trade and port security. We depend on America's ports as a critical stop in the supply chain, and so does the United States military. America's ports are part of our national security infrastructure. Some ports participate in the vital National Port Readiness Network, a cooperative designed to ensure readiness of commercial ports to support force deployment during a crisis. Given the significant role that ports play in the United States, it's critical to hear from experts in this area. Today, we're going to learn about some of the biggest threats to ports here and abroad, hear why ports make good targets for bad actors, and discuss what our prevention and our response should look like. We are joined today by Mr. Christopher Hickey, Senior Systems Engineer with the Naval Research Lab, Mr. Tony Padilla, Senior Advisor for Maritime Trade and Development at the Department of State, Rear Admiral John Mauger from the United States Coast Guard. Unfortunately, Mr. Bill Doyle could no longer be here today, and so we will miss his participation, but we've got a great lineup. We'll hear from each of these experts, followed by a moderated discussion, and then questions from the audience. So let's get started. Please join me in welcoming our panel. And I'll go ahead and apologize to our panelists right now for abbreviating their biographies. Their credentials are so long that we would be here for the full hour if I were to read the entire thing. So trust me, we are in good hands. Our first speaker is Mr. Christopher Hickey with the Naval Research Laboratory. With over 25 years of experience in maritime security operations, intelligence, maritime domain awareness, state and local intelligence fusion center operations, and counterterrorism analysis, Mr. Hickey is regarded as a leader in the fields of maritime and open source intelligence. He was the first civilian intelligence professional to work for all three military maritime agencies in their strategic intelligence centers. In addition to serving as a former Navy surface warfare officer, he has also spent time working on the industry side for both iJet International and Centra Technology. Mr. Hickey is a Navy Master Training Specialist, instrumental in training efforts for a number of military and non-military programs. Mr. Hickey?
Sarah, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Of course, the first thing I noticed being up here is I'm the one who's got the notes I'm reading off of, and my distinguished panelists don't. Oh, nope. They do. Oh, so much for my powers of observation. So I am honored to be here among my fellow panelists who represent the best in their respective professions. As for my title, please disregard that senior systems engineer, as I got kicked out of engineering at the Naval Academy over 37 years ago. What I am really is a maritime threat intelligence professional and have been one since 1992. I've chosen this graphic, maybe not.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. You probably have all seen this graphic, right? It's a picture of the world with a lot of dots on it in the oceans, right? And it represents maritime trade, like over 24 hours. But I use that graphic to illustrate the depths and challenges and threats facing port security personnel globally. Of note, that graphic you probably have all seen in a number of publications or briefings throughout your professional career shows a great deal of the known ship traffic, but not all of it. The graphic shows approximately, I'm going to say, about 250,000 ship tracks worldwide on a good day. But you have to add in the hundreds of thousands of dark ships, those ships that are not emitting AIS either. And why? They're doing it by choice. They're doing it by accident. We all have stories about sailors flipping switches they shouldn't, by malfunction because things break, and maybe the largest is by lack of regulation. While a fair amount of illicit maritime activity takes place aboard AIS-compliant ships, it is these dark ships or dark targets that typically pose the greatest threats. Domestically, the United States has long maritime borders that, for the most part, not monitored or surveilled on a 24/7 basis, creating a permissive environment that enables massive amounts of illicit goods and cargoes to be imported and exported. Drugs, money, weapons, and worst of all, the trafficking of people. All of this moving illegally across our maritime borders every day. This illicit maritime activity costs the American public and our allies a great deal. I'm going to reserve the rest of my comments for the question and moderation, and so back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey. Next, we have Tony Padilla. Tony Padilla is a senior advisor for maritime trade and development at the U.S. Department of State. He oversees maritime trade relations with U.S. allies and partners, and he works with the interagency and administration partners to develop strategies that minimize supply chain disruptions and bottlenecks. He's involved in a variety of matters related to strategic overseas ports, the sanctions process, and addressing coercive economic behavior. Mr. Padilla served as a staffer on Capitol Hill and is a prior naval supply officer with assignments in CENTCOM, INDOPACOM, and NATO. Tony?
Well, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. It's great to be back. I want to also thank the Navy League for having me back to share some of these perspectives on all the maritime issues that we care about. This may be a bad idea because I think you've already touched on some of the stats, but at the risk of getting slapped on stage, I'll go ahead and do that anyway. So I want to begin with a few stats and also talk about some of the State Department's equities. From an economic perspective, as Sarah alluded to, international trade through our nation's ports support the employment of nearly 31 million people, provide about $1.5 trillion in personal income, and generate over $5.5 trillion of economic activity, thereby accounting for over a quarter of our nation's GDP. Beyond this, of course, many of our ports safeguard government-owned vessels and dual-hatted commercial sea lift vessels, so our military can project power abroad. Simply put, without seaports, our economy would be crippled, and I think over the last couple of years, we've seen some of that, those cases. However, it's no secret that many of our ports fall prey to criminal activity, as Chris mentioned, such as illicit trafficking of narcotics, arms, wildlife, and people, and are also used as a medium for trade-based money laundering. They're also at risk of cyber intrusions, and from an environmental standpoint, they're challenged by local communities all the time to keep pollution under control. Ports are also the one place where all the contentious policy issues come together for debate and discussion on all things transportation, and especially on how to mitigate our supply chain challenges. But in that process, we've seen how ports can mistakenly become the fall guy for rising inflation, empty store shelves, and supply chain delays. Seaports involve a complex web of other important actors, such as the trucking community that's been enduring long queues at ports, congested container yards, insufficient pay, and overall very tough working conditions. Ports are about the rail community, and of course, the numerous ocean carriers and thousands of seafarers stuck at sea, whether stuck means off the coast in San Pedro Bay or stuck in the Black Sea. So who cares about ports? Certainly the industry cares about ports. We don't have to go too deep into that. They get up every day trying to keep their company's balance sheets in the black, right? The legislative branch cares about ports, especially since the chairman of the House Transportation Committee recently described maritime as, quote, the most important part of the supply chain. Although I know many of us here today would wish that more members of Congress would show up for a lot of the maritime-related hearings. Even the White House is getting to know ports pretty well. In particular, the NSC and the NEC view ports through a strategic and economic competition lens, and has released, of course, the executive order on strengthening America's supply chains. The executive branch certainly understands ports, given there are about 24 different agencies who have a maritime touch point. And even my home agency, the State Department, has grown increasingly concerned about the ability of malign actors to restrict the flow of goods and materials through ports as a means of exerting leverage for political gains. Said another way, the State Department is very concerned about trade warfare, to coin a War College term. Yet, as each day passes, our ports and supply chains continue to facilitate and walk on a tightrope, raising lots of concerns about their impact on inflation, their ability to be nimble enough to support national emergencies. A prominent think tank has said, quote, decades of downsizing and consolidation have left U.S. maritime logistics forces brittle, contributed to the decline of the U.S. shipbuilding industry and the merchant marine. In a similar way, international trade has been brittle before the pandemic began. It's been brittle before the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal. It was brittle before the Russians blocked cargo ships in the Black Sea and before the citywide lockdowns in China. And now, just about 2 months away, our trade remains brittle in the face of West Coast labor negotiations. And I will continue to say that it's brittle if we continue to allow foreign entities to move about 98% of all of our waterborne imports and exports. So yes, we do have a long way to go to ensure our supply chain stays secure, resilient, diverse, and transparent. But meanwhile, our strategic competitors are taking up leading positions within the maritime domain. The PRC, for example, has made it a national priority to invest in all facets of its maritime industry. China now produces 96% of the world's shipping containers, 80% of the world's ship-to-shore cranes. They own about 30 of the top 50 largest container ports in the world, receive nearly half of the world's shipbuilding orders, and the list goes on and on from there. And some of you have heard me talk about before that our primary competitor views the world almost entirely through supply chains. And those supply chains can now be weaponized. Weaponized by deploying economic tools such as market access, trade finance, and investment measures to influence countries to keep them reliant and dependent on that nation, again, to achieve their political objectives. We've seen many examples of this at the State Department already, especially within the last 6 months. Oftentimes, these cases go under the radar. You don't hear about it in the mainstream media, and there's no sort of like South China Sea saber rattling going on, but it's happening. I think I'll stop there and just say that it's time to get back to being a true maritime nation. It's time to get back to our roots. There's a lot at stake, and we need to do it before it's too late. As Sir Walter Raleigh said in 1829, he said, "For whoever commands the sea commands the trade. Whosoever commands the trade of the world also commands the riches of the world, and consequently, the world itself." So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tony. Our next panelist is Rear Admiral John Mauger with the United States Coast Guard. Rear Admiral Mauger serves as the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy and is responsible for the development of national policy standards and programs promoting marine safety, security, and environmental stewardship. 3 directorates carry out the mission: inspections and compliance, marine transportation systems, and commercial regulations and standards. Programs include waterways management, navigation and boating safety, ports and facilities, merchant mariner credentialing, vessel documentation, marine casualty investigation, commercial vessel inspections, and port state control. His prior flag assignments include the Assistant Commandant for Capability and the Director of Training and Exercises, J7, at the U.S. Cyber Command. Admiral Mager?
Hey, thanks very much, Sarah. And thanks so much to the Navy League for the opportunity to be here this morning to talk to you about the importance of our ports and the need for port security. You've already heard from the panelists about how important our maritime economy is to our nation. And these are really sit up and take notice numbers. I mean, when you're talking about 25% of US GDP or employment for 1 in 7 Americans, this is a tremendous resource for our nation. And it's so exciting that we have the opportunity here at Sea, Air, and Space to talk about this aspect of it. I know that there's a lot of commercial entities and businesses that are looking for opportunities, and 25% of GDP want jobs for 1 in 7 Americans. That's a tremendous amount of opportunity. But we also know, since we're gathered here at Sea, Air, and Space, this is a vital resource for our national security as well. It's how we project power and humanitarian aid around the globe. It's what makes our nation great. And so the focus for today's discussion is really about how do we encourage and ensure the security of this vital resource for our nation. If you were at the breakfast this morning, the Coast Guard breakfast this morning, you heard about many of the wonderful things, and you saw great photos up on the screen about all the great things that your Coast Guard does for this nation. And I'm honored to have the chance to serve in this organization. In addition to all those cool things that you saw displayed up there on the screen, we're also the nation's lead federal maritime regulator. And as Sarah noted in her remarks, we regulate all aspects of the maritime industry, right? We set standards and conduct compliance activities for the mariners or the seafarers themselves, issuing them credentials attesting to their capability to serve in the industry. We set standards and oversee the design and construction and operation of the vessels that those mariners work on to make sure that they're safe, secure, and they operate sustainably. We set standards and conduct compliance activities for the facilities that those vessels tie up to. And then lastly, we set standards for and mark the nation's waterways to ensure that safe, secure flow of trade, right? So we're involved in this across the whole spectrum of the maritime commerce, the maritime transportation system. I can tell you that as a regulator, it's an exciting time, but it's also an incredibly challenging time because there are 3 big challenges that are really driving change within the maritime industry right now. We call this within the Coast Guard the triple challenge. It's a desire to get more capacity out of the maritime transportation system. At the same time, it's a desire to reduce the environmental impact. And the only way that you can do more with less is by becoming much more complex. So let me break down each one of those 3 things real quickly and then focus a little bit more on the ports and port security side of it. So in terms of capacity, I think everybody understands that within the maritime transportation system, there's a drive to larger vessels, more frequent calls. We see things like the raising of the Bayonne Bridge up there in the Port of New York and New Jersey, so it can support the arrival of ultra-large container vessels. These are 15,000 plus containers carried on each vessel, right? But that drive for capacity is about other uses for the waterway too. It's not just bigger traditional uses. It's more recreational traffic. In 2020, we saw the largest increase in recreational boating activity, which was wonderful, but it came with the corresponding largest increase in recreational boating deaths as more people took to congested waterways, right? But it's also non-traditional uses of the waterway. I spend a lot of my time talking with the space industry because the space industry is a maritime industry, as many of you in this room know. The only way that commercial space is viable here in the US is by the recovery of those rockets. And right now, the primary way that those rockets are being recovered is out at sea. And it's being done with really unique capabilities, but it's being done in a way that brings new risks and new entrants into the waterway. And so that's part of the capacity challenge, this drive to get more and more out of the maritime transportation system that we see. At the same time, there's a desire by all stakeholders to reduce the environmental impact from the supply chain. You know, when you talk to big box retailers or stores or anybody that relies on the supply chain, they'll tell you how 80% of their carbon footprint is in their supply chain. And so that anybody that's in the supply chain business right now is being driven by economic pressures, by client pressures, by consumer pressures to reduce that environmental impact. And so within the US, we're seeing this, and globally, we're seeing a push to decarbonizing the maritime transportation system. But we're also looking at environmental impacts beyond decarbonization. The Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, law passed by Congress, has the Environmental Protection Agency developing a new standard for the discharges from vessels, and the Coast Guard conducting the compliance activities. It's going to be the largest compliance activity that we've ever undertaken within the Coast Guard. So these are substantial changes. And it's not just looking at a more sustainable maritime transportation system, it's using the maritime environment to create sustainability within the US. And so President Biden, the administration, have announced a drive to get 30 gigawatts of power from offshore wind activity or offshore renewable energy activity by 2030. And so that's creating tremendous opportunity within the maritime industry as those companies drive to meet that. But again, the only way that you can get more capacity at a reduced environmental footprint is by becoming much more complex. And that brings in new challenges for the maritime industry, right? New opportunities in terms of automation and highly optimized designs, but also new challenges in terms of cybersecurity for that automation. How do we interact with automation, highly automated systems and humans? And so we're working very closely to address those issues. As we look at the ports are where this all comes together. We've talked a little bit already about the vessels, but also that interrelationship with the multimodal surface transportation, whether it's rail or trucking or any other modes there. And the challenge that we see there within our nation's ports is, again, that triple challenge coming together at the dockside there within the ports. But it's also about making sure that we have promoted a secure international regime to make sure that this all happens safely and securely. And so we work very closely with the International Maritime Organization to implement the International Ship and Port Security Code around the globe and make sure that the ships that are coming to the US and the cargoes that are coming to the US, that we can rely on that security that's provided around the globe. It's also a system that relies on the seamless flow of information, right, to ensure that seamless flow of trade throughout. And so wherever you have that need for seamless flow of information, you also have those heightened risks for cybersecurity attacks. And so cybersecurity is an issue that we've invested in quite a bit here, and we need to continue to invest in as a shared responsibility between those port communities and between the federal agencies that oversee those operations. And we can have a chance to talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer. And so thanks so much, Sarah, again, for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was really illuminating remarks, and it was great to have such a variety of perspectives. I'm going to start with some questions, but then we will be turning to audience questions later, so please start thinking about those now. We're going to go ahead and start with Mr. Hickey. If you could, tell us a bit about what are the crucial checkpoints in international maritime trades, and how vulnerable are they to actions that can impede or even stop maritime traffic from using them?
Yeah, choke points, they're a nightmare, right? I mean, well, you have nightmares about them. But I like to think of them as geographic areas that create target-rich environments for those bad actors who are looking to negatively impact international commerce, or just create challenges for local or regional maritime trade flows. Choke points funnel ships into a much smaller area. They do the targeting for the bad guys, sometimes very small areas, such as you mentioned, as canals. The choke points I'm thinking of are the Straits of Malacca, Lombok, and Sunda in Southeast Asia, the Straits of Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb in the Middle East, the Dardanelles in Europe, and of course, the man-made ones, the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, all of which are very vulnerable to the violent actions of violent actors by being either nation states or non-government ones. I can't imagine the challenge of providing physical security to the Panama or Suez Canal, right? It's just mind-boggling how much it would cost to really do it. So even simple threats can take advantage of the challenge of providing adequate security over these waterways, such as someone with a few rocket-propelled grenades, which could conceivably close a major waterway by disabling a ship's engine or steering. Remember the Evergreen container ship stuck in the Suez Canal? Imagine that happening in maritime choke points around the world and only taking a few handheld weapons designed in the 1950s. Or a simple naval mining operation like Libya conducted in the southern approaches of the Suez Canal in the 1980s. A few years ago, there was a video made by what I think I remember an Al-Qaeda splinter group in the Sinai. The video showed them with RPG-7s, rocket-propelled grenades, adjacent to the Suez Canal with the ships passing them in the background. So they're only a few hundred meters away. The Evergreen incident, while an accident, does show how a simple grounding could blocking a choke point, in this case, the Suez, could severely cause severe shockwaves throughout the world. Although of interest, its sister ship is stuck in the mud north of the Bay Bridge, but I haven't heard about that impacting, so they must have stuck it in a good spot than impacting. But so yeah, choke points are a problem. I'm surprised that more bad actors have not taken advantage of that. I know.
So Admiral Mauger, that leads me into a little bit of the Coast Guard's work. You, in addition to safeguarding ports at home, you also do a lot of that work with our international partners on their port security as well. Can you tell us a bit about that work?
Sure, Sarah. Thanks so much. We heard already that 90% of U.S. trade arrives on foreign ships and is coming, obviously, then from foreign ports as well. And so it's really important that as a nation that we make sure that that cargo and those ships, where they're loaded, where they depart from, are as secure as possible to thereby ensure the security of our own nation. And so after the attacks of September 11th, 2001, we worked with the International Maritime Organization to implement the International Ship and Port Security Code, an IMO instrument that applies globally around the world. And we have units located in Europe and in Asia that have port security liaisons, and we have personnel here in the US that administer the program that prioritize and travel to ports all around the world to evaluate the security for compliance with International Ship and Port Security Code. And then in cases where they're deficient, to work with the State Department to provide assistance and aid where able to bring them into compliance so that everybody can participate in this global trade community, but to do so securely. And so that ability to go out and assess the security in those foreign countries is a key enabler for the International Ship and Port Security Code. But it has reciprocity portions or reciprocity requirements to that legislation or to those standards as well. And so we also host foreign teams that come in and are able to look at how the US implements its security in commercial ports here in the US. Again, that provides an opportunity to elevate awareness around the globe and ensure a secure backbone for this vital international trade.
So obviously the United States is not the only global actor working with partners globally on their maritime infrastructure. Tony, you're a known expert in China's Maritime Belt and Road Initiative. I'd like to hear what you think the Chinese government's end goals are with all of their global investment in maritime infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I mean, that's a very huge topic. We can have a whole separate panel on that, the Belt and Road Initiative. But I think the long and short of it is that the The motivations of the People's Republic of China are driven largely by making sure that they have a stable middle class, that middle class has economic opportunities, and also it's about the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. And so how do they do that? Through the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a multifaceted initiative that covers about 70% of the world's energy reserves. It covers all facets of transportation, ports and warehousing, distribution hubs, rail, just about everything transportation related. They are a very energy thirsty country. Also, they have a sense of food insecurity. They're very concerned about the US Navy's presence in the South China Sea and their ability to conduct a blockade through the Malacca Strait. This is why they are routing a lot of, or they want to route a lot of the oil shipments and petroleum, et cetera, through places like Burma, and also have large plans to ship agricultural goods through Gwadar port in Pakistan. I think also that they have a very sense of anxiety about the United States and their motivations. They have also, very importantly, capitalized on an opportunity, and this is something that the United States should be thinking more about, and that is the fastest growing economic region, which is in the Indo-PACOM area. In the cities in Africa and the demographics and some of the economic trends there are just mind-boggling. And they are seizing on the opportunity to get in there early, to be able to forge those deep relationships with the governments and also a lot of the transportation community there. And I think when we look at this, they launched this initiative 9 years ago. So we're a little bit behind, I think, in terms of a nation to have a coordinated, top-down driven, holistic, focused approach to this. Again, they are trying to dominate the supply chain in many respects, again, for their own interest. And there's really nothing wrong with that, except when we talk about certain cases of malign behavior, which we can go into later if you'd like. But we have an opportunity here as well, and this is about supply chain security, right? So if we want our supply chains to be secure, we have to make sure that we take the necessary actions. Things like making sure that our maritime community has unfettered access to global shipping lanes and to overseas key ports. China has taken a strategy called strategic strong points. As we talked about the choke points, right? So they have carved out presence in all of the world's choke points, from Djibouti to Gwadar to Hambantota and many other places around the world, including in our own backyard. We're seeing some presence in the Bahamas, in many parts of the Caribbean, in Latin America. So it's a huge challenge, and there's a lot of things that we can do. One of them is helping on technical cooperation with other like-minded partners and allies, helping them increase their foreign investment screening protocols, for example. And one of the things I'd like to mention, a plug for, is the State Department's new Strategic Ports Initiative. And this is not related to the 17 strategic ports that we have around our nation, but this is very similar in that it's focused on overseas ports. And this is a program that helps deter and deny malign behavior within the maritime space. And we help to do that working with our allies and partners.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Chris, I saw you nodding. Did you have any other thoughts that you want to add about that?
Well, yeah, Panama, they're in on one side of the canal, right?
Both sides,
Oh,
actually.
both sides.
Yeah.
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 You have to tip your hat to them. They've done a pretty good job about.
And this is why we're going down there next month to have a economic dialogue with the Panamanians and about 15 other countries. Mm-hmm. So we are making headway. There's baby steps, but there's a sense of urgency with this. We have to get busy.
That's good to hear. All right, Mr. Hickey, you have worked for all 3 Maritime Services Strategic Intelligence Centers. So you have a very broad perspective, more so than I think probably anyone else here. Can you tell us what was similar for the threat environment in all 3? What were some of the overlaps that you saw? And what makes maritime targets unique?
Okay, so working for all 3 maritime services was pretty easy because they were all in the same building over in Suitland, the National Maritime Intel Center. When I finally left that building, it took me like a week of carrying boxes out, and the security officer, the police officer was like, "You have a lot of stuff here." And I said, "I've worked for 3 different agencies in the same building. I'm cleaning out like 10 years worth of stuff." So I had never envisioned that ever happening, right? As you heard, I'm a Naval Academy grad, a Navy Reserve officer. And I was telling the Admiral before, I just love being in the Coast Guard. The responsibility and trust they give to much junior people is awesome. And just really appreciated those opportunities. Working for the Marines was also very interesting. And I don't have, how many Marines or former Marines do we have in the audience? Okay, you might appreciate this. So one day, one of the staff sergeants was, I don't know, he wasn't yelling at me, but he was sort of mocking me or saying, "You abandoned us at Guadalcanal," right? I mean, so the first thing is I appreciate the Marine Corps. They love their history. They know. So here's a staff sergeant. He knows about Guadalcanal and how the Navy did abandon the Marines during the initial phase of the attack there. And I looked at him saying, going, neither one of our forebears were there or had anything to do with that. I'm here. I'm a Marine Corps civilian. So, you know, give me a little slack. But it was very interesting about how they looked at people who weren't, right, wearing the green. And then, of course, the Navy, you know, that's my home planet, right, raised from age 18 in it, and you know, probably before because I wanted to be in the Navy. But threat-wise, I say the Navy and Marine Corps probably share some because the Coast Guard's responsibilities to be part of DOD in times of crisis, and, you know, although the last time it happened was World War II, although in Vietnam War, they were heavily involved in Operation Market Time, if I got the right operation of the protection of the coast of South Vietnam. So there was a lot of similarities, and of course, they're mariners, right? The Marines go for rides, and no insult intended to the only former Marine. And I was on an amphib ship when I was a surface war officer, so I got a great introduction to expeditionary warfare, amphibious assault. And actually, so what I did in the Marine Corps is that I was beach defenses, and ports. And ports is something I think all 3 services share. They need ports, they have to protect ports, and they need what comes out of the ports. So even while I was in the Marine Corps, we were doing planning for operations around the world. Oh yeah, what's the throughput? What, you know, where can we do this, right? All the logistics planning and giving that information to those planners so they could see. So that was sort of a common thread, was, as you mentioned, right? You can't do stuff in this world without ports. So very simple that. But the cultures were interesting. And if anyone wants to talk, I could talk ad nauseum about that. But it did give me a great perspective seeing that. And then, of course, I did. So my first civilian boss is the second guy to do it. I somehow convinced him to sort of follow me, but he did it at a different, higher level. But so you asked me about maritime targets. I was asked by a student a few years ago why I stayed working in the maritime intelligence field. And no one had ever asked me that question before, so it took me a couple of minutes to gather my thoughts. And my answer was layered, of course, right? But one of those layers directly relates to your question. But first of all, since I was 18, I've been a mariner, so I love the sea. And I'm going to digress, Admiral, and I want to appreciate what you do about environmental protection. As a young man growing up along the ocean in southern Maine, just appreciating the beauty and what we get out of it and how it sustains us. So thank you for what you do. But why do they make them so unique? Well, I told the student that day, I'm sorry, back to the original question. They go slow. They go slow for the most part, right? It takes days, even weeks, to get somewhere. It took me 2 weeks on an LST in the Navy at 16 knots, which is about 18 miles per hour, to cross the Atlantic. It takes a month to cross the Pacific. So if there was ever a crisis with a ship inbound with somebody or something or, on board, I could go home at night and get a good night's sleep. And I'd come back the next morning and it's still hundreds, maybe 1,000 miles away. Because it still would be plodding its way, at whatever 16 to 20 knots, trying to get to wherever in the Western Hemisphere that was of interest to us. So I don't envy someone at TSA or any of the other law enforcement agencies that have got to respond to a passenger inbound to JFK in New York City when that person pops positive on the terrorism watch list, because there's no going home, right? That is the person is going to be there in minutes, and they need to respond appropriately. So I think that's one thing about targets that I've enjoyed. I don't know if that was a good enough answer, but
It was great, thank you.
All right.
And kind of jumping off that, Admiral Monger, obviously we've been talking about how some ports are just commercial seaports, some are also, military ports of demarcation, and obviously the Coast Guard is responsible for the security of both of them. So tell us a little bit about how, when you're working with some of those military seaports, how does that affect the Coast Guard's thinking about security framework?
Sure. Well, thanks. Let me come back to the first part of that, which is the focus on the commercial side of it. I think that we all appreciate or need to appreciate the role that our merchant marine plays in enabling the Department of Defense, right? And so I would say that there's really not any commercial port that's just commercial. It's commercial and it's serving the nation's needs for the Department of Defense. And throughout the conference, the earlier panel talked a little bit about the sea lift capability that we need. We're certainly working very closely with Maritime to make sure that we have the seafarer capability that we need as well, because our merchant marine has really served our nation well and has been the force that has enabled us to prevail in conflict overseas. And so our commercial ports are vital arteries for the outflow and inflow of military cargo. And so we have to work very closely with the commercial entities when those operations occur. A lot of that security is just based on this International Port Security Code, the Maritime Transportation Security Act, which is our domestic regulations, and then the Area Maritime Security Committee that exists in that port, in each of those ports, to make sure that all of the folks that are working in that port can come together, are prepared to have a plan and are prepared to execute that plan to address security incidents, but then come together in times of need to accomplish what the nation accomplishes or needs to accomplish. There are a couple very specific DoD ports, and so in those cases, we work closely with the Department of Defense to make sure Department of Defense responsible for the security of those ports, or the services are. But we work very closely to make sure that there's adequate regulations in place. There's complementary physical waterside security when needed to be able to address the challenges that they face. I think the emerging challenge, and I get the sense that we'll have a chance to talk about this, that cuts across all of that, is this cybersecurity challenge, right? We've looked at our ports as threats from the water or maybe land side, and have put great regulations and requirements in place to address those kind of proximate threats. But we need to realize that as where we are today and as we go forward, those threats are going to be increasingly delivered through cyber capabilities, and the attacker may not even be in this country. And so we have to make sure that we're working together, both with the commercial entities and then with the Department of Defense, to make sure that our ports are protected against cyber attacks. So thanks, Sarah.
Sure. Yes, there has been the president, up to the presidential level, he's been warning industry quite a bit about the maritime industry in particular to be on watch for cyber attacks. Do you have any guidance? I know we have a lot of maritime industry participants here. Do you have any guidance or advice for what they should be doing to best safeguard against these cyber attacks?
Yeah, thanks so much. I was really fortunate to have the chance to go up and spend 2 years at U.S. Cyber Command and get a sense of how do we deal with this threat within the maritime industry. I think for too long a time, maybe 2010 to 2018 kind of timeframe, I looked at this as a technical problem, and we needed to have, the cybersecurity engineers and folks that understood the wiring and the software and all that stuff to deal with it. And I was really frustrated just personally, because as I started to engage in this and said, hey, I think we have to do something on the commercial side. We've done did a number of things during that time period. Kind of always got the response back, well, hey, it's a highly classified threat, and we can't figure out how to tell folks what's going on, and so you just have to trust us. Keep moving out. What I learned from my time up at U.S. Cyber Command, and what we've shifted to under this administration with the leadership here, is really treating cyber as any other operational threat that an organization has to deal with, right? There are tons of things that the COO has to deal with on a daily basis, whether it's safety issues, physical security issues, maybe it's labor, maybe it's supply chain, all of those things. And cyber has to be looked at as an operational risk. Yeah, there's some technical specialist piece to it, but there is really, at the end of the day, this is an adversary that's thinking, maneuvering, calculating, trying to get into that system, trying to get into your system to cause you either economic harm or some other form of harm. And so you have to look across your whole organizational risk profile and say, have we elevated this to the right level of attention? Are we applying the right level of resources to get after it? And so domestically, under the Maritime Transportation Security Act, facilities that are regulated by MITSA are required to address cybersecurity as part of their overall security plans. We published some guidance in 2020, and we told the facilities and the vessels to begin updating their plans. And over the course of this past year, those plan submissions have started coming in. So we're seeing how folks are addressing it. Under those rules, they're required to have somebody that's in charge of their security, including cybersecurity. They're required to conduct an assessment of their current cybersecurity posture, identify gaps, develop a plan to mitigate those gaps, and then exercise, and most importantly, report. What we're seeing in the current threat environment is we're dealing with this ongoing crisis in Ukraine, where we've seen previously that as part of this Russian playbook for attacks, they've used and incorporated cyber into their attacks. And we can roll back to NotPetya in 2018, and that was, the maritime industry was impacted by an attack that wasn't directed to them. And so what we want to make sure is that everybody is on guard for either something direct, some intentional disruption of your operations, maybe perhaps like a ransomware attack against a pipeline or something like that, or the potential that you could be caught up in a blowback attack, on other segments of this interconnected cyber infrastructure. And so the key things that we're asking everybody to do is, one, make sure that you're coming into compliance with the plans and you have a person in charge. Make sure that you're reporting, and there's multiple modes for reporting cyber incidents. And that reporting really inoculates everybody else against the threat as well, because when we get the reports, we're able to put those into databases, we're able to share those out, we're able to develop the patches and fixes to prevent those reports from propagating. So reporting is a lot like just coughing into your elbow. It protects others. And so that's one of the key things that is in place now. I think that we can go into this more, but take any further questions from the audience or from you as we go.
All right.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks. So we will be moving on to audience questions. As you see, there's a microphone here. While I'm waiting for, oh, great, we've already got one. Please ID yourself and please end with a question.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Phil Hassel. I work for Palantir. Admiral Mauger, I'm really interested in two particular things. First off is understanding a little bit more about the risk assessment process and how much kind of goes into identifying those risks, assessing the risks, and then working to mitigate or prevent those. And then the second part is, for the last 3 days, I've heard a lot about maritime domain awareness, and I'm curious, specific to port security, what sort of tools do you have in place, and where do you feel they're working well, and what do you feel the limitations are?
Okay. Hey, thanks so much for those questions. I'm actually going to turn to Chris, if you
MDA?
don't mind, to talk a little bit about some of those different things that go into the assessment. If you feel you
Oh.
can. We do have a little bit of problem here because we got this bright
There.
spotlight right behind you. So you're just a disembodied voice there in the bright lights.
Well, I'm going to talk about the Coast Guard SRAM.
Yeah.
I'm
Go-
going to goof
perfect.
up the marine security risk
Yeah.
assessment methodology because I
Yep.
use it in a class to teach how to take the threat score and integrate that in and then into the larger risk equation. You're right. Boy, in an ideal world, we could be able to take all of the data that we get, right, flowing into us from a myriad of sources, data sources, and automatically come up. And I'm sure systems like that exist, but I think folks in the Coast Guard are still pretty much doing somewhat of that by hand. Because the challenge, and I have with my students, is the subjective into, I'm going to call it the quantitative, right? You have reports, and the analyst or the system analyzing these things has to make the human judgment whether it's a high, medium, or low score, then to put it into the equation. So right there, we still have the human factor of their education, their training, their perception, their biases as they're evaluating intelligence to feed into that threat score that impacts the risk assessment.
Yeah.
So I think that's an ongoing challenge.
Thanks, Chris. I think that was an excellent description of the current state. And, if you think about how we need to evolve and, within the Coast Guard, we heard about the tech revolution earlier this morning at the Coast Guard breakfast. But that's really about how do we bring more capability to and more information to bear on these problem sets. And so Chris did a super job of explaining how we do things now, and there's a subjective portion to the score at the end of the day. But what if we gave that analyst, some business intelligence? Hey, what's going on economically in that region, right? What if we combine that with some national security intelligence that you have access to, Chris, and some of our folks have access to? What if we combined it with, some other information on the ground, maybe social media information that was on the ground, to really enrich that judgment that analyst has to make? And so this is where we'd like to go and where we're driving to within the Coast Guard. I think it's where all the analysis is driving to. How can we bring together those disparate data sources to get after it? I would say that the same thing's happening on the maritime domain awareness side as well. There's a bunch of different capabilities that are out there, but there certainly is an increasing desire and a need to stitch those capabilities together to really get a fulsome picture, not just of the legitimate traffic, as Chris pointed out during his open remarks, but what's happening beyond the beacon of those legitimate traffic as well. And so I think it was a great question and a great framing for, hey, there are other opportunities out there. How are the services taking advantage of this? And we're driving into that.
I would add about the MDA is, we're, past 9/11, MDA started getting created before 9/11 by some really smart folks in the Coast Guard headquarters and elsewhere who had the ear of Admiral Loy. I think it's like a wonderful case of how people can work and with patience influence policy on a major scale. We have the technology, we've got the information, we have the policy to support information sharing. And in my experience, what is stopping us really from achieving a real good level of MDA at all levels, so we're talking public, private, state, local, federal, and international, is people. It's culture, right? Organizational culture that people are raised in about sharing or not sharing. And I think that's really the impediment right now. Sometimes it's personality, but a lot it's just organizational culture, in spite of we have the technology, we have the policies, and we're just sometimes lacking the will.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
Next question.
John Conroy with G-Captain, and I wanted to say thank you to Admiral Monger. We've had a few conversations about, sexual harassment on board ships, and I think that's a big part of port security, and I know you're working on that, and thank you. But I want to talk about Russia and Ukraine and the Black Sea. 10 years ago, GCAM with the piracy, we started to do that, and we were getting a lot of questions. Can I carry arms? Do I need a security team? What's the Navy doing to protect us? And they were all coming to GCAM to ask these questions, and we didn't have answers. And Tony, you did just an amazing job putting together with NATO and Maritime and giving the answers to mariners. There was a real international appreciation for the Navy because of that. Now we're back in the same way. I'm getting 5 million inquiries on GCAM now. What do I do if I'm in the Bosphorus and a mine? What do I do if I pass a Russian Navy ship? Are there submarines in the Mediterranean? And no one's really asking this question. So can we do for this security situation what we did for piracy? Is that possible, sir?
Oh, well, want to make sure I understand the question. Can we do exactly?
Well, the NATO ship got attacked, and
Yeah.
I know it's not MARAD's job to because we're focused on U.S. flag, but there are a lot of U.S. mariners on foreign flag now, and they feel
Isn't
like
this
they don't know what to do in these situations
Yep.
because practical advice with piracy it was get security team, do convoy. That practical element. What do I do if I'm in the Bosphorus and I see a mine? Can I see a mine? How do I contact the Navy? Those practical things are not there right now.
Yeah, so you're raising an issue that we're working on literally like right now. My colleagues are working on this. There are thousands, I think it's about 1,500 seafarers who are stranded increasingly every day, going with less food and less water. There are towboats and tugboats and small watercraft sneaking out in the middle of the night, 2 in the morning, trying to shuttle some of these provisions out to them just to keep them alive. We got all the agricultural produce is slowly eroding away. The Dardanelles and the Bosphorus Strait, that's a Montreux Convention issue as well. So Turkey plays a major role as a NATO country, and that makes it complicated with their relationship with Russia because they depend on a certain amount of energy. They have complete sovereignty over the Bosphorus and Dardanelles. Mines, yes, there's a mine layer there in the northwest quadrant of the Black Sea, and I know that the IMO is working very closely with a lot of the international partners to try to mitigate that. There are some very specific practical things that are being discussed right now. I can't go into details, but I can say that the NATO Shipping Center, based out of Northwood, the UK, is doing a tremendous job in monitoring the situation. And yes, so how do we get the mariners safely through safe passage through the strait? And there's a couple of ships outside of the Sea of Azov as well. So I don't think I really have an answer for you, but I know that there's a lot of smart people working on this right now.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And I just ask that we try to communicate that because I think some of the communication gets lost. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, last
Thanks, Joe.
audience question, and then we'll ask you all for your final thoughts.
Thank you. Amy Jordan, I'm with the Hampton Roads Alliance. In our region of Virginia, we hosted a series of workshops and summits last summer to look at pain points around port security and how unmanned systems could be used for both marine, air, land, or all of the above, I should say, for both port security and emergency response. Right now, we are actually looking at opportunities and how that can be addressed. Of course, most ports are owned by municipalities or state governments, and we are working, of course, with Coast Guard and federal agencies. How is the Coast Guard and others working to help utilize unmanned to solve some of these security and emergency response issues?
Yeah, thanks so much. So first and foremost, we recognize that there's a tremendous potential to use unmanned systems across a whole range of missions. If you head down to the Coast Guard booth on the floor, you can meet Captain Tom Remmers, who leads our unmanned systems office. That office was created in response to a National Academies report that spent about a year looking across all the Coast Guard mission areas and identifying opportunities for using unmanned systems in Coast Guard missions. They may be software systems, they may be UAVs or UASs or all of that stuff. And so we see tremendous opportunity going forward. We're looking at those things through the eyes of that office. Last thing that we're also work through the Area Maritime Security Committees for is to sponsor opportunities for port security grant funding. Each year, FEMA allocates about $100 million to different port security grant projects. While there's a tremendous focus on cybersecurity, on key nodal points and on large grouping areas, there's an opportunity as well to use unmanned systems to address those problems. And so we'd encourage you to keep working. I know you're building a great community down there with the colleges and the port and the local infrastructure to build something and put in for. So thanks so much.
All right, before we wrap, I'm going to ask you all for your final thoughts, anything you want to leave with the audience or anything we didn't have a chance to get to. So we'll start with Chris.
Thank you so much. I guess the first thing I'm going to say is the seas are always going to attract those interested in doing harm or moving illicit cargo that are going to harm our communities. The seas are a vast place for them to hide their operation. So use the cliche, eternal vigilance is key. Right? Threats change and morph, right? Change is the only constant. Where's another good cliche, right? But it's so true. It's the only constant we have in our existence. So security must do the same. We brought up about cyber. Admiral, you went in great detail. Thought you hit the nail right on the head. Just the greatest example of the latest thing about morphing and having to adapt to that. The last thing I want to, I'm going to call you a midshipman first class. I don't know if you're a cadet. Is it a cadet or a midshipman? Cadet. You're a cadet. I'm a young baby boomer. I'm 59, so my days are numbered in the workforce. My work as an intelligence studies instructor allows me a glimpse into those coming into the intelligence community to replace myself and others like me. I will tell you, they are smart, they're savvy. God, I'm getting
Verklempt.
They're digital natives. It's amazing how they're thinking, and they're fiercely dedicated to serving their communities. I teach at the National Intelligence University, so that's an interesting group of people in the military and civil servants. And then I also teach up at the University of Massachusetts, and so very different geographic groups of people. Boy, but when they talking about, yeah, I want to serve, I want to contribute, it's there. I feel good about that, right? Because everyone talks about the generations following us, but I have great confidence about these generations that are following me.
Thank you. Tony, any final thoughts?
Well, no, it's been a pleasure, especially being flanked by two leaders in this space. I really appreciate the opportunity. So many challenges and topics and so little time. Just real quickly, I want to just touch on Admiral Mauger's emphasis on the data piece, hugely important, obviously. I think just at a more basic high level, we have to remember that that it's the flow of goods that are important, and there's all kinds of issues related to that, but there's two other layers on top of that to make supply chains and our economy work, and that is the flow of data, right? The flow of letters of credit and cargo manifest and bills of ladings, and we certainly want to be careful. I know Transcom is thinking about this very carefully about malign actors having the ability to peer into those systems and monitor certain data points. But the third layer too is also the flow of financial capital and the money that goes along with that. So very important, lots of things. I mean, things like automation are on my mind, right? A very controversial topic, but I think that when we look around the world, we have to look at our comparative progress. How much progress have we made as a nation compared to other nations who have very high functioning ports? Lots of challenges in the maritime space. We could be here for a very long time. I just want to say that all of this, of course, requires leadership, right? And to be able to solve problems is what's on my mind. there's a little bit of concern with our ability to prevent and solve problems at a very basic national level. And so it reminds me of former Secretary of State Colin Powell, who once said that leadership is solving problems. And when your soldiers stop bringing you problems, that's the day when you stop leading them. So it's very important that we look at these issues and be bold and come up with a lot of innovative solutions, even if it's not politically expedient. And there's a lot to do there. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Admiral Mauger, any final thoughts?
Sarah, thanks so much. Like my panelists, really appreciate you facilitating this, Navy League hosting this, and then get to join on the stage here with some great experts in this area. You know, we talked about the why for this, that sit up and take notice numbers, 25% of US GDP, 1 in 7 jobs for 1 in 7 Americans, right? That is the economic benefit, that national security benefit, obviously implicit in this as well. I think that, you know, we had a very rich dialogue around the international impacts of our port security system, but I'll close again with a focus a little bit on the cyber side of it. Again, this really is the challenge that we all face together going forward. I can't come to sea, air, and space without talking about cyber because it is so critical to what we have going on. And so maybe if nobody has a trademark on the acronym SASC or SASC, maybe we can change this to sea, air, space, and cyber next year. I don't know. I'd ask Mike Green about that. But it really is a key issue. I mentioned real quickly the Port Security Grant Program. We expect that announcement to come out in mid-May. It'll be about $100 million, again, looking for opportunities to secure our ports with an emphasis, again, on cybersecurity. And so I would encourage you, if you're in that business, if you see an opportunity to connect with this industry, to jump in and take advantage of that opportunity. Your nation needs it. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I wish we had another hour. This is such a good discussion. So thank you to our panelists, thank you to the Navy League, and thank you to our audience for being so great and attentive.